At exactly 3:14 a.m. on a Saturday, the residents of West 29th Street were woken by a sound that vibrates in your chest. Not sirens, not the storm, but the synchronized rumble of 217 motorcycles cutting their engines at the exact same moment. Most neighbors peeked through their blinds expecting a gang war. What they saw instead was an honor guard. They were there because 3 hours earlier, a freezing 7-year-old boy had whispered 7 words that turned an outlaw club into the only family he had left. This is the story of Eli and the Gentle Giants. If you believe justice should be loud, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Now, let's go back to the freezing diner where it all began. He'll come. He always comes. That was the whisper. A tiny, reedy sound that was barely audible over the hiss of the automatic doors. It was 2:13 a.m. on a Saturday in Erie, Pennsylvania. Outside, the lake-effect snow was coming down in sheets, the kind of storm that punches sideways and turns the world into a gray blur. The wind chill was 18 degrees and dropping. Inside the lakefront travel plaza, the air smelled of burnt coffee, wet wool, and fryer oil. It was a haven for long-haul truckers, snowplow drivers, and weary travelers trying to outrun the storm. 14 people were scattered across the booths and the counter. Most were staring at their phones or into their mugs. Nobody looked at the door. If they had, they would have seen something that didn't make sense. A child. Alone. Eli Carter Turner was 7 years old, but he looked 5. He stood 4 feet, 1 inch tall, a fragile collection of sharp angles and shivering bones. He was wearing a navy knit beanie that had been stretched so thin you could see his scalp through the fabric, lint-pilled and worn. His coat was an oversized tan parka with a broken zipper, tied shut with a piece of rough twine. Below that, pajama bottoms soaked to the knees. And the shoes. That was the sound that cut through the low hum of the diner. Squeak, squeak, wheeze. His sneakers were canvas, soaked through with slush, making a wet squeak against the tile floor with every step. Between the squeaks, there was the sound of his breathing, shallow, whistling, the sound of lungs that had inhaled too much cold air and too much carbon monoxide. He had 90 yards to cover from the door to the counter. To a healthy adult, that's a 10-second walk. To Eli, whose body temperature was drifting dangerously low, it felt like miles. He didn't want money. He didn't want food, even though his stomach had been empty for 22 hours. He wanted someone to see him. But seeing is a choice. And that night, the people of Erie were choosing blindness. The first rejection happened at Booth 4, a couple in their 30s, road-tripping back to Ohio. They looked nice. They looked safe. They had a blanket draped over their legs and were sharing a plate of fries. Eli paused by their table. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his chin tucked into his chest, his big hazel eyes tracking their faces, waiting for permission to exist. The woman looked up. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't see a victim. She saw a complication. She nudged her husband and angled her shoulder away, creating a physical wall. They pretended he wasn't there. Eli flinched. It was a small movement, barely a tremor, but it confirmed what he had learned over the last 17 months. He was invisible. He kept moving. Squeak, squeak. Rejection number 2 was louder. He approached the counter. The cashier was busy, thumbing through a stack of receipts, tapping on her phone. She was tired. Her shift was almost over. When she saw the small, dirty hands gripping the edge of the laminate counter, she didn't look at his face. She didn't see the lashes clumped with melted snow, or the lips that were pale and cracked. "No loitering," she said, her voice flat. "Buy something or leave, kid. I'm not running a daycare." She slid her phone across the counter, further out of reach as if he might snatch it. Eli had $12.14 in a plastic coin pouch in his pocket. Everything he owned in the world. But he knew it wasn't enough to buy safety. He backed away. Rejection number 3 came from the off-duty security guard by the magazine rack. He saw Eli stumbling. He saw the way the boy's shoulders were hunched. But instead of asking, "Are you okay?" he saw a liability. He reached out and grabbed Eli's sleeve, his grip tight on the upper arm, right over the thumb-shaped yellowing bruise that was already there. Eli froze. It's a reaction biology teaches you when you live with a predator. Don't fight. Don't run. Just freeze. And hope it ends. "You need to get outside if you're not waiting for a ride," the guard said, steering him toward the vestibule. "Can't have you bothering the customers." Eli pulled away, his boots skidding on the wet tile. He managed to slip out of the guard's grip, ducking behind a display of souvenir mugs. The guard sighed, checked his watch, and went back to his magazine. Not his problem. But the 4th rejection, that was the one that nearly broke him. Near the restrooms, 2 volunteers from a local church were collecting donation jars for a winter outreach program. They were wearing matching vests. They were talking about charity. They were talking about helping the least of these. Eli stepped into their path. He held out his hand, trembling. One of the volunteers, a woman named Sandra Klein, looked down. She saw the mismatched layers. She saw the desperation. And then she saw the chaotic state of his clothes. "Where are your parents?" she asked, her tone sharp, lecturing. "You shouldn't be wandering around like this. It's disrespectful to the people raising you. God gave you a home. Stop making trouble and go back to your guardian." Go back to your guardian. The words hit Eli like a physical blow. Go back to the utility room. Go back to the zip ties. Go back to the man who smiled in public and turned off the heat in private. She turned her back on him to adjust the label on her donation jar. Eli stood there, swaying slightly. The room was spinning. The heat of the diner was making his frozen skin burn. He was clutching a folded piece of paper so tight against his chest that the corners were crumpling. He had one option left. In the far corner booth, facing the door, sat a mountain of a man. Calvin Grizzly Mercer was 52 years old. He was 6'3", broad-shouldered, with a gray beard that covered half his face. He was wearing a black leather jacket. There were no patches on it anymore. The Hell's Angel rockers had been removed years ago, but the outline of where they used to sit was still visible, a faded ghost on the leather. Grizzly was nursing a black coffee and a bowl of chili. He was watching the storm. He was a man who had spent his life being judged. People saw the knuckle scars. They saw the old ink on his forearms. They assumed trouble. They assumed violence. They didn't know he was the safest thing in that diner. They didn't know he had lost a little brother 30 years ago to a system that didn't listen. Eli began the walk toward the corner booth. Squeak, squeak, wheeze. He paused twice to catch his breath. His vision was tunneling. The lights were getting too bright. Grizzly saw him coming. He didn't look away. He didn't angle his shoulder. He stopped eating. He set his spoon down. He watched the boy with calm, dark eyes that missed nothing. He saw the way Eli tracked the exits. He saw the raw, chapped skin on the boy's wrists. He saw the fear. Eli stopped at the edge of the table. He was shaking so hard his teeth were clicking together. He reached out and placed the folded paper on the table. It was a crayon drawing. A crude, shaky picture of a man on a motorcycle with wings. Underneath, in block letters, it said, "Hell's Angel." Grizzly looked at the drawing. Then he looked at the boy. Eli whispered the words he had been saving. The words that had to work, because if they didn't, he was going to die tonight. "Please, he's coming to take me back." 7 words. No drama, no screaming. Just the quiet, terrified plea of a child who knew that home meant a coffin. Grizzly didn't ask who, he didn't ask why. He moved with a speed that belied his size. He stood up, stepping between Eli and the rest of the diner. He unzipped his leather jacket and held it open, creating a wall, a shield, a sanctuary. "You're safe now," Grizzly said. His voice was a low rumble, like a heavy engine idling. "I'm not leaving." He knelt down, ignoring the creak in his knees, bringing himself to Eli's eye level. He offered an open palm. No grabbing, no steering, just an offer. He positioned his massive body so that Eli was tucked behind his shoulder, hidden from the door. For the first time in 17 months, someone was standing in front of Eli, not over him. But what Grizzly didn't know yet was that the clock was ticking. He didn't know that 3 miles away, a man named Trent Holloway was checking a tracking app on a hidden phone. He didn't know that the accident had already been staged. And he didn't know that the boy shivering behind his leg was holding the key to a crime so cold it made the blizzard outside look warm. End of Stage 1, Stage 2, Stakes and the Promise. Grizzly took the clean flannel blanket from the empty booth next to them and wrapped it around Eli's shoulders. He could feel the heat radiating off the boy's skin, feverish, unnatural. "Sit," Grizzly commanded gently. He slid Eli into the corner of the booth, trapping him safely against the wall. "Drink this." He pushed his water glass forward. Eli took a sip, his hands trembling so violently the water sloshed over the rim. He looked up at Grizzly, and the first layer of the truth spilled out. "My guardian says I'm bad," Eli stammered, his voice thin and hoarse. "But I just need to call someone. He locks my door when it snows." Grizzly's jaw tightened. Locks the door when it snows. "What's your name, son?" "Eli." "Okay, Eli, I'm Grizzly. Nobody locks doors on you tonight. Not while I'm breathing." But the terror in Eli's eyes didn't fade. He kept glancing at the window, at the headlights cutting through the storm. "He takes my food," Eli whispered, the second layer peeling back. "He ties my wrists with the plastic things when I cry. If I talk to anyone, he says I'll disappear like my dad did." Grizzly looked at the boy's wrists. There they were. The raw pink rings of irritated skin where zip ties had dug in. Not fresh enough to bleed, but scarred enough to tell a story of months, maybe years. Grizzly felt a cold rage settling in his gut. This wasn't just neglect. This was torture. "Who is he?" Grizzly asked. "Trent. Trent Holloway. He's a deacon." Of course he was. Grizzly knew the type. The pillar of the community. The man who shook hands on Sunday and broke spirits on Monday. But then came the bombshell. The third layer. The one that changed this from a rescue mission into a war. Eli leaned forward, clutching Grizzly's leather sleeve. "I heard him on the phone. 5 nights ago. I was on the floor by the vent." Eli squeezed his eyes shut, reciting the words he had memorized in the dark. He said, "Winter does the work for you." He said, "I just need him quiet until the payout clears. $296,700. He said he did it before, and nobody questioned the last one. Silence descended on the booth. $296,700. Specific numbers meant truth. Kids don't invent specific numbers. Winter does the work. That meant freezing to death. That meant tonight wasn't just a cold night. It was an execution date. Grizzly looked at his watch. 2:24 a.m. If Trent Holloway was tracking the boy, he would be here soon. And if the police were called, they'd run the name, see legal guardian, and hand Eli right back to the monster. It had happened before. CPS called 2 times, Eli whispered, as if reading Grizzly's mind. Nothing changed. The police came 9 nights ago. Trent told them I lie. They believed him. The system had failed. The safety nets were shredded. Grizzly pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't dial 911. He dialed a number that hadn't been saved in his contacts for 5 years, but one he knew by heart. It rang once. "Preacher, it's Grizzly." On the other end, in a warm house 10 miles away, Daryl Preacher Kane sat up in bed. He was 61, a man of paperwork and precision, the president of the local chapter. "I need every brother within 50 miles at the Lakefront Plaza. Now." A pause. The line crackled with the weight of the request. "What's going on?" Preacher asked. "We got a 7-year-old boy being hunted by his guardian, and the system is helping the hunter. We're not waiting for cops to take their time on this one." "Say no more. We're coming." The line went dead. And that was it. No questions about proof or evidence. No concerns about legal complications. Just action, because that's what brotherhood meant. While the invisible signal went out across Erie, Grizzly turned his attention back to Eli. "Eli," he said softly, "you see that door?" Eli nodded, terrified. "Nobody comes through that door that I don't let through. You understand? By my patch, my name, and every mile I've ridden, nobody takes you back tonight. We're going to the hospital, and then we're going to the truth." But they needed more than muscle. They needed specialists. Within minutes, the text chain was lighting up phones across the county. Switchback was the first to respond. 49 years old, ex-cop, former internal affairs. He knew how the system worked, and more importantly, he knew how it broke. He knew exactly which judges signed emergency orders at 3 a.m. and which cops could be trusted. Doc was next. 67, a former combat medic who had seen more trauma in vivid color than most doctors saw in a lifetime. He was the one who would know that Eli's clumsiness was actually early-stage hypothermia and that the boy needed a specific rewarming protocol, not just a hot chocolate. Chalk was already pulling his boots on. A 55-year-old former high school teacher who carried a badge of a different kind. He knew CPS language. He knew the protocols they were supposed to follow and exactly where to look to prove they hadn't followed them. And Pixel. 28 years old, a tech wizard who could pull court records, bank transfers, and insurance riders faster than a detective could type a warrant application. They were coming. Back in the diner, the atmosphere had shifted. The road-tripping couple who had ignored Eli was now watching Grizzly with suspicion. The cashier was whispering into her phone, probably calling the manager or the police, to report a biker bothering a child. They were the witnesses, the silent majority. Frank Delaney, the cook, peered through the pass-through window. He had seen the bruises on Eli's arm when the boy took off his coat. He had felt a twinge of guilt, a heavy stone in his gut. I should do something, he had thought. But he had a mortgage. He had a shift to finish, so he had flipped another burger. Now, watching the biker wrap the boy in a blanket, Frank felt a different kind of shame. The shame of letting a stranger do the job he was too coward to do. Sandra Klein, the church volunteer, was still by the restroom, organizing her cash box. She had heard Eli's plea. She had told him to go home. Now, seeing him safe in the booth, she felt a prickly indignation. Why is he with that criminal? She thought. That's not safe. It is a strange quirk of human nature. We will watch a child suffer in silence, but we will panic when a dangerous-looking person steps in to stop it. Grizzly ignored them all. He was watching the clock. "Can you be brave for 2 more minutes, Eli?" Grizzly asked. Eli nodded, clutching the crayon drawing. "Is he coming?" "My brothers are coming," Grizzly corrected. "And when they get here, you're going to see something, Eli. You're going to see a family that you choose, not one you're stuck with." You might be thinking that Grizzly was planning a brawl. You might be imagining tire irons and shouting matches. That's the movie version. The reality was far more terrifying for a man like Trent Holloway. Because when the gentle giants arrive, they don't bring chaos. They bring order. They bring documentation. And they bring a spotlight so bright that no cockroach can hide from it. Grizzly's phone buzzed. A text from Pixel. Found it. Insurance rider updated 23 days ago. Beneficiary, Trent Holloway. Payout matches the kid's number exactly. Also found a death certificate for a Kayla Benton, 2021. Same guardian. Same cause of death. Grizzly's blood ran cold. It wasn't just a plan. It was a pattern. "Eli," Grizzly said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Did you ever know a girl named Kayla?" Eli's eyes went wide. She lived in the room before me. Trent said she ran away to the woods." "She didn't run away," Grizzly said, his hand closing into a fist beneath the table. "And neither will you." Just then, headlights swept across the diner windows. Not one pair, not two, dozens. The rumble started low, distant, like thunder on the horizon. Then it grew. It vibrated the silverware on the tables. It shook the coffee in the mugs. It wasn't the chaotic noise of a gang. It was the synchronized, heavy drone of an army. 217 motorcycles were turning into the lakefront travel plaza. The door chime dinged. And now, armed with the truth, a ghost from the past, and an army of brothers, Grizzly was about to introduce Trent Holloway to the only accountability that mattered. The sound of 217 motorcycles cutting their engines at the exact same second is a sound you feel in your teeth. It wasn't a chaotic die-down. It was a precise, synchronized silence. One moment, the roar of V-twin engines was rattling the diner's plate glass windows. The next, absolute stillness. In the parking lot, the logistics were military. The bikes were lined up in the overflow lot across the street, kickstands down, angled perfectly at 45 degrees. There was no shouting, no revving for attention. Just rows of chrome gleaming under the amber streetlights, wet with snow, forming a blockade of steel. Inside the diner, the air had been sucked out of the room. The cashier had stopped texting. The security guard had moved his hand away from his belt. The road-tripping couple was staring out the window, mouths slightly open. Everyone expected a riot. Everyone expected a bar fight to spill through the doors. Instead, the door chimed once. Daryl Preacher Kane walked in first. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a grandfather who could bench press a Buick. He was wearing his cut over a thick hoodie, his silver hair tied back neatly. Behind him came Doc, carrying a trauma kit, and Switchback, whose eyes were already scanning the room for exits and cameras. They didn't swagger. They walked with the quiet economy of motion, that comes from years of riding in formation. Grizzly stood up from the booth, keeping one hand on Eli's shoulder. "Preacher," Grizzly said, nodding. "Grizzly," Preacher replied. His voice was soft, barely a murmur. He looked down at the boy huddled in the corner. He took in the bruise on the arm, the frantic eyes, the way Eli was trying to make himself small enough to disappear. Preacher didn't say hello. He didn't ask how the weather was. He looked at Doc. "Assess him." Doc moved in. 67 years old, hands steady as stone. He knelt by Eli. He didn't speak to the boy like a baby. He spoke to him like a soldier. "Eli, I'm Doc. I'm going to check your hands and your breathing. Is that okay?" Eli nodded, freezing as Doc's fingers touched his wrist. "Pulse is thready," Doc said quietly to Preacher, not breaking eye contact with Eli. "Skin is clammy. Capillary refill is slow. He's hypothermic. Core temp is likely sitting around 94. We're in the danger zone for cardiac arrhythmia if we don't warm him slow." While Doc worked, Pixel, the tech specialist, slid into the booth opposite them. He opened a laptop. He didn't look like a biker. He looked like an IT guy who happened to wear leather. "I pulled the court records," Pixel said, turning the screen so Preacher and Switchback could see. "It's worse than we thought." The screen showed a timeline. July 2024. Trent Holloway granted emergency guardianship. August 2024. Life insurance rider added to father's existing policy. $296,700. September 24. First withdrawal from Eli's trust fund. $8,450. Labeled home repairs. "I cross-referenced the home repairs vendor," Pixel said, his voice flat with disgust. "It's a shell company linked to an offshore gambling site. The money didn't go to the house. It went to blackjack." "And the previous victim?" Switchback asked. Pixel clicked a tab. A photo of a teenage girl appeared. Kayla Benton, 16. Died February 2021. Official cause? Hypothermia due to accidental exposure. Guardian at time of death, Trent Holloway. Insurance payout, $164,900. The policy was taken out 7 weeks before she died. The booth went silent. This wasn't neglect. It was an industry. Trent Holloway was farming children for payouts, using winter as his weapon. "He's got a pattern," Switchback said, his cop instincts taking over. "He isolates them, starves them to weaken their resistance, then waits for a storm. Accidental exposure is the perfect murder weapon in Erie. No fingerprints, no weapon to find, just the cold." Grizzly felt Eli stiffen under his hand. The boy was listening. He knew. "He said," Eli whispered, his voice trembling. "He said winter does the work." Preacher turned from the screen. He looked around the diner. His eyes landed on the witnesses. He walked over to the counter. The cashier flinched. The security guard took a step back. "You," Preacher said gently to the cashier. "You saw this boy come in?" I told him to leave," she stammered. "Store policy, no loitering." "He's 7, Preacher said. "He has frostbite on his ears. Did the policy mention anything about that?" She looked down, shame flushing her cheeks red. Preacher turned to the security guard. "And you put your hands on him?" "I was doing my job," the guard said, but his voice lacked conviction. He looked homeless." "He looked like a child," Preacher corrected. "A child who had walked 3 miles in a blizzard." He moved to Sandra Klein, the church volunteer. She was clutching her donation jar, her knuckles white. "And you," Preacher said, stopping in front of her. "You're collecting money for the needy?" "Yes," Sandra whispered. "For the winter shelter." You told him to go home, Preacher said. You told him God gave him a guardian. Did you ask him why he was running? I didn't want to interfere, Sandra said, tears welling up. I thought he was just being rebellious. Interfering is what saves lives, Preacher said. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. Which was worse. You saw the clothes. You saw the fear. You chose comfort over truth. Sandra began to cry. Not loud sobs, but the quiet weeping of someone realizing they had failed their own moral code. Preacher walked back to the booth. He looked at the men around him. We have probable cause, Switchback said. Between the financial records, the physical state of the boy, and the witness testimony of the threat, we have enough to compel an entry. The police didn't listen last time, Grizzly reminded them. They'll listen this time, Switchback said, pulling out his phone. I'm not calling patrol. I'm calling Captain Miller. He owes me a life. But before they moved, there was a moment that had to happen. The decision. The diner went quiet. 23 men, the corps officers, had crowded inside. The rest were outside, a silent vigil in the snow. Preacher looked around the circle. We have a boy who needs a hospital, Preacher said. And we have a man who needs to be stopped before he collects on that policy. We are not vigilantes. We are citizens making a citizen's arrest until the authorities arrive to do the job they failed to do. Are we clear? Clear, the room murmured. All in favor of escorting this young man to safety and ensuring Mr. Holloway answers for Kayla and Eli? For a moment, nothing. Just the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of the slush hitting the windows. Every single hand went up. Not a moment's hesitation. Not a single dissenting voice. 23 men voting unanimously to help a child they'd never met an hour ago. Doc, you take Eli to St. Bridget's, Preacher ordered. Take Tiny and Hammer for security. Nobody gets in that room but medical staff. If Holloway shows up claiming guardianship, you block the door. Understood, Doc said, already lifting Eli into his arms. Eli grabbed Grizzly's jacket. You coming? Eli asked, panic rising. I'm coming, Grizzly said. But first I have to go make sure he can't hurt you anymore. I promise, I'll meet you there. Doc carried Eli out to a waiting SUV. As they passed the rows of bikers outside, a strange thing happened. The men didn't cheer. They didn't shout. They simply stood at attention, watching the boy pass, a silent honor guard of leather and respect. Then, the engines fired up. The convoy to 418 West 29th Street was a spectacle of discipline. They didn't speed. They obeyed every traffic light. They rode in a tight, serpentine formation that stretched for 3 city blocks. When they turned onto West 29th, the neighbors started flicking on porch lights. Louise Harker, the neighbor who had heard the door latches clicking at night, peeked through her blinds. She saw the street filled with motorcycles. She saw the police cruisers, 4 of them, lights flashing silently, pulling in behind the bikers. Switchback had made the call. Captain Miller was there. The house was dark. It looked normal, a small beige bungalow with snow piled on the roof, a God bless this home sign on the front door. Captain Miller walked up the driveway, flanked by Switchback and Preacher. The bikers formed a perimeter, facing outward, away from the house, ensuring no interference, ensuring the neighborhood saw that this was justice, not a raid. Miller pounded on the door. Police, open up! No answer. Trent Holloway, we have a warrant for a welfare check. Still nothing. Miller nodded to the officer with the ram. 1 swing. The door fractured. 2 swings. It flew open. They found Trent Holloway in the kitchen. He wasn't loading a gun. He wasn't packing a bag to flee. He wasn't destroying evidence. He was standing at the counter, wearing flannel pajama pants and a t-shirt that said, "World's Best Uncle." He was spreading mayonnaise on a slice of white bread. The TV in the living room was playing a rerun of a sitcom. Laugh tracks echoed through the silent house. He looked up, confused, holding the butter knife like a conductor's baton. "What on earth?" Trent said, putting on his concerned citizen mask instantly. "Officer, what's going on? Is Eli okay? I've been worried sick. I was just about to call." "Save it," Captain Miller said. "Hands behind your back," the officer barked. "This is harassment," Trent shouted as they spun him around. "I am a deacon. I am a guardian. That boy is mentally unstable. He runs away all the time." "We know about the insurance, Trent," Switchback said from the doorway. "We know about the gambling debts, and we know about Kayla." Trent went still. The fight drained out of him. The butter knife clattered to the floor. While they cuffed him, Switchback and Preacher went to the back of the house, to the utility room. It was exactly as Eli had described, but seeing it was worse. The door had a heavy-duty slide latch on the outside, the kind you use for a garden shed, not a child's bedroom. Switchback slid the latch back. It clicked loudly, the sound Louise Harker had heard through the shared wall for months. Inside, the air was freezing. It was colder than the rest of the house. The single vent had been taped over with duct text. There was no bed, just a pile of dirty laundry and a thin, synthetic blanket. In the corner, a bucket. And on the shelf, the smoking gun. A space heater. But not just any heater. It was an industrial unit, unplugged. The manual was sitting next to it, open to page 14. Warning: do not use in enclosed spaces. Risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. It wasn't an accident waiting to happen. It was a staged crime scene. "He was going to plug it in tonight," Preacher said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "He locks the kid in, plugs in the faulty heater, goes to sleep, wakes up to a tragedy and a check for $300,000. Switchback took a photo of the manual, then a photo of the latch, then a photo of the zip ties hanging from a nail on the wall. "Institutional failure," Switchback muttered. CPS walked past this room twice. They saw a closed door and didn't ask to open it because Trent Holloway offered them coffee and a smile. Outside, the arrest was happening. It wasn't dramatic. It was pathetic. Trent Holloway, the man who terrified a 7-year-old, was weeping as they dragged him down the steps. He was slipping on the ice in his slippers. "My back," he whined. "You're hurting my back." The crowd of bikers watched in silence, 217 pairs of eyes. They didn't touch him. They didn't need to. Their presence was the weight of the world bearing down on him. Frank Delaney, the cook from the diner, had driven over. He was standing on the sidewalk, watching. He saw the respectable deacon in handcuffs. He saw the police bringing out evidence bags, the manual, the zip ties, the laptop. "I knew," Frank whispered to the man next to him. "I knew something was wrong." At 3:14 a.m., Trent Holloway was placed in the back of a squad car. The charges were read loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Trent Holloway, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Eli Turner. 2 counts of insurance fraud, aggravated child endangerment, unlawful imprisonment, and we are reopening the investigation into the suspicious death of Kayla Benton." "I have a reputation," Trent screamed as the door slammed. "Not anymore," Preacher said quietly. The squad car pulled away. The silence returned to West 29th Street, but this time It wasn't the silence of secrets kept behind closed doors. It was the silence of a job done. Preacher looked at his men. He checked his watch. "St. Bridget's," he said. "We have a promise to keep." The trial would take 3 days. The jury would deliberate for less than 2 hours. The bail recommendation would be set at $2 million, high enough that a man who had stolen $15,000 and gambled it away wouldn't be making it anytime soon. But that was for later. Right now, justice had been served. But justice wasn't the ending. It was only the beginning. Because saving a life is one thing. Giving a life back, that takes a different kind of strength. Stage 4. Resolution. The sounds of the storm were replaced by the rhythmic beep of monitors in the pediatric ICU at St. Bridget's Medical Center. It was a sterile sound, clean and safe, a sharp contrast to the whistling wind that had haunted Eli's nights for months. Eli was small in the hospital bed. He was hooked up to IVs, warming his blood and flushing the carbon monoxide from his system. His skin was no longer gray, but a flushed, feverish pink as circulation returned to his extremities. Doc hadn't left his side. For 6 hours, the former combat medic sat in the plastic chair next to the bed, reading the charts, translating the doctor's jargon into plain English for the nurses, ensuring that Eli's refeeding syndrome was managed with military precision. You don't just feed a starving child a burger, you have to restart their metabolism like a delicate engine. At 5:43 a.m., the door to the ICU room opened. Eli, half asleep, flinched. His eyes darted to the door, expecting Trent, expecting the anger. Instead, the doorway was filled with black leather. Grizzly walked in. He smelled like cold air and exhaust, the smell of the road. He looked tired, lines etched deep around his eyes, but his expression was soft. He walked to the bedside and knelt down, just like he had in the diner. "I told you I'd come back," Grizzly whispered. Eli reached out a hand, bandaged now, the raw wrists covered in soft gauze, and touched the leather of Grizzly's sleeve. Is he coming?" "No," Grizzly said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's in a cage, Eli. A real one, with bars that don't open from the inside. He can never hurt you again." Eli let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a year. "He said nobody wanted me." "He lied," Grizzly said. "Look." Grizzly pointed to the window that looked out into the hallway. Eli turned his head. Through the glass, he saw them. The hallway wasn't empty. It was lined with men. Switchback, Preacher, Hammer, Tiny. Dozens of others, taking turns standing guard. They were drinking bad hospital coffee, leaning against the walls, speaking in low tones. They weren't making a scene. They were simply present. A wall of living, breathing protection that no nightmare could breach. They had taken over the waiting room. Pixel had set up a command center on a coffee table. Chalk, the former teacher, was already on the phone with the school district, using his administrative voice to ensure Eli's records were pulled from the school that had failed him and transferred to a safe district. Over the next 3 weeks, the system that had failed Eli was dismantled and rebuilt by a group of men society labeled as outlaws. The recovery wasn't a montage of happiness. It was hard work. There were night terrors. There were panic attacks when the heater clicked on. But every time Eli woke up screaming, someone was there. Not a nurse he didn't know, a brother. One afternoon, Pixel walked into the room with a folder. "We found your money, kid," Pixel said, grinning. "The insurance company tried to stall. We sent Switchback down to their office with a copy of the police report and a very polite letter from our lawyer. The trust fund is locked down. Every penny Trent stole for his gambling? The bank is refunding it under fraud protection. You've got $300,000 waiting for college, or a house, or whatever you want when you turn 18. But money doesn't fix a home. The biggest question remained. Where would Eli go? The state wanted to put him in emergency foster care. A stranger's house, another unknown bedroom. Switchback wasn't having it. My wife, Elena, and we've been licensed for 3 years, Switchback told the caseworker, slapping a thick file onto her desk. We have an empty bedroom. We have passed every background check the state has, and unlike the last guy you approved, we actually answer our phone. The caseworker looked at Switchback, a man with a shaved head and tattoos up to his neck. Then she looked at his file. Retired police detective. Commendations for valor. Clean record. She looked at Eli, who was holding Switchback's hand like it was a lifeline. Approved, she stamped the form. The day Eli left the hospital, it wasn't in a social worker's sedan. He walked out the front doors wearing new clothes, jeans that fit, a coat that was thick and warm, and boots that didn't squeak. He was holding that folded crayon drawing of the Hell's Angel. Grizzly was waiting by his bike. "Ready to ride, little man?" Grizzly asked. He lifted Eli up and placed him on the back of the massive Harley. He put a child-sized helmet on Eli's head, a helmet the club had custom painted with wings on the side. "Hold on tight," Grizzly said. When they pulled out of the hospital lot, they didn't go alone. The escort formed up, 217 bikes. They shut down Main Street, not for a protest, not for a parade, for a homecoming. They rode past the school that had ignored him. They rode past the church where Sandra Klein watched from the sidewalk, tears streaming down her face, finally understanding what true ministry looked like. They rode past the diner, and then they turned onto a quiet street in the suburbs, pulling into a driveway where a woman named Elena was waiting on the porch with a golden retriever and a welcome sign. Switchback killed the engine. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. "We're home," Switchback said. Eli looked at the house. Then he looked at Grizzly, who was taking off his gloves. "Are you staying?" Eli asked. Grizzly smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I'm just down the road, Eli. We all are. You're patched in now. That means you're family, and family doesn't leave." End of Stage 4. Stage 5. Message, moral. 6 months later. July in Erie, Pennsylvania, is a different world. The lake isn't a gray monster. It's a shimmering blue expanse. The air smells of cut grass and barbecue smoke, not wet wool and fear. In the backyard of Switchback's house, the air was filled with noise. But it wasn't the noise of engines. It was the sound of laughter. It was Eli's 8th birthday. If you looked at the photos from that day, you wouldn't recognize the boy from the diner. He had gained 12 pounds. The hollows in his cheeks were filled in. The dark circles under his hazel eyes were gone, replaced by the bright, mischievous spark of a kid who knows he's allowed to take up space. He was running across the grass, chasing a frisbee. He wasn't moving with that terrified, shuffling gait anymore. He was stomping. He was shouting. He was running with the confident, clumsy speed of a boy who knows that if he falls, someone will catch him. And the guests at this party? They weren't your typical suburban neighbors. There was Doc manning the grill, flipping burgers with surgical precision. There was Pixel showing Eli how to fly a drone. There was Preacher sitting in a lawn chair, drinking lemonade and watching the scene with the quiet satisfaction of a general who had won the war. And there was Grizzly. He was sitting on the grass, letting Eli and the golden retriever climb all over him. The scary biker. the man people crossed the street to avoid. He was currently wearing a paper party hat that Eli had placed on his head. "Higher!" Eli yelled, launching himself off Grizzly's knee to catch the frisbee. "I got you!" Grizzly laughed, catching the boy mid-air before setting him down gently. The transformation wasn't just in the backyard. It was in the numbers. In the 6 months since that night at the Travel Plaza, the local chapter of the Hells Angels, the Gentle Giants, had raised $42,100 for the county's Child Advocacy Center. They had established a new program called The Watch, where bikers volunteered to escort at-risk kids to court hearings so they wouldn't have to face their abusers alone. Because of Eli's story, the school district had overhauled its reporting protocols. 3 administrators had been fired for negligence. The police department had implemented a new mandatory check for all homeschooling claims involving non-parental guardians. Bullying reports in Eli's new school district had dropped by 78%. Mostly because word got out that picking on kids wasn't just mean. It might bring a very loud, very leather-clad response team to the PTA meeting. But this story isn't really about bikers. It isn't about leather vests or motorcycles or the shock value of seeing tough men do tender things. It's about the lie we tell ourselves. The lie that says, "It's not my business." The lie that Sandra Klein told herself in the diner. The lie the neighbors told themselves when they heard the lock slide shut. We convince ourselves that someone else will handle it. That the police, or the teachers, or the system will save the day. But systems are made of paper. Safety is made of people. Eli Carter Turner didn't survive because of a system. He survived because one man, a man with a past and a patch, decided that looking away was a sin he couldn't live with. He survived because Grizzly didn't care about being polite. He cared about being right. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever felt like you were shouting into a storm and no one was listening, let this be your reminder. You are not alone. Help can come from the shadows. It can come from the people you least expect. And to the rest of us, look closer. Pay attention to the child who flinches when you move too fast. Listen to the silence in the house next door. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Be the person who stops eating their chili to look a stranger in the eye. You don't need 217 motorcycles to change a story. You don't need a leather vest. You just need the courage to stand between a vulnerable person and the door and say, "I'm not leaving." That night in the diner, Eli held a drawing of an angel with wings. He thought he needed a miracle from the sky. What he got was a mechanic with grease under his fingernails and a heart bigger than his engine. And as the sun set on that birthday party, casting long golden shadows across the grass, Eli ran past Grizzly one more time. He didn't squeak. He didn't wheeze. He laughed, a sound that rang clear and strong against the evening sky. "Hey, Grizzly," he shouted. "Watch this." Grizzly watched. He always would. If this story moved you, if you believe that every child deserves a protector, please subscribe to the channel and share this video. In the comments below, tell us about the Grizzly in your life, the person who showed up when everyone else walked away. And remember, sometimes the scariest thing in the room isn't the monster. It's the angel sent to stop him.